Hello, it's Angelica at the Osteopathy and Healing Center. In this video, we're going to be talking about the diaphragm. So we mentioned the diaphragm in the last video, but Dr. Still in his book, he mentions a little bit more about the diaphragm. We're going to talk about prolapsed viscera, D.D. Palmer, hope, and cells. So let's get started. The first thing, again, we're going to talk about the diaphragm. So Dr. Still, he had irregular heartbeat, and he blamed the irregular heartbeat for the diaphragmatic tension. He wrote a letter to Harry Patterson saying he was feeling better. He found that his xiphoid process, the xiphoid cartilage, strove in, and that led his 6th and 7th rib to drop off of the sternum and fall under the spleen, which shut off the intercostal nerves and the nerve supply to the diaphragm, which bothered the aorta, the main artery of the heart, as it passed through the diaphragm, causing palpitations of the heart. And that's found on page 242. So very interesting connection with the diaphragm. And that's where we'll finish with the diaphragm today. But if you want to watch the previous video, which was part 8, you'll find more information about the diaphragm there. To continue, he talks about obesity now, and he says that obesity is a condition with potentially serious consequences. The compression and the weight of the organs are sagging into the pelvis, and that might stretch the mesentery. The connective tissue membrane supporting the internal organs and carrying their nerve and blood supply. So in gastroptosis, there is a pulling of the esophagus, a pulling on an infinity of infinitesimal nerves and fascia, stretching the mesothroat, the mesotongue, the mesoheart, the mesolung, and all the meso-connective tissue supports. In men, organs hang more vertically than quadrupeds, making stagnation and congestion more likely, with a host of potential effects. The mesenteric tension might irritate the splachnic nerves. These are the sympathetic nerves to the gut. That will then disturb peristalsis and result in signs and symptoms such as diarrhea, constipation, sometimes in chronic cases, he says, impacted fecal matter, or by restricting the blood circulation cause kidney, stomach, pancreatic, and other problems, including, this is an interesting point, all manner of benign and malignant growths. You cut off the splatnics, Dr. Still warned, and you will be all tumors below. Page 242. So Dr. Still lectures about prolapsed viscera. He says the sagging sigmoid colon and the rectum from obesity, constipation, from falling, from jars, or even an act as simple as you're straining to lift a heavy object after you have eaten a large meal, might interfere with the hemorrhoidal arteries, veins, and related nerves that will cause piles, inflammation, ulceration, and cancer. The combination of prolapse and constipation was another consideration to bear in mind. The weight of the retained feces could draw the cecum, the ascending colon, towards the pelvic floor, and through A combination of pressure and mesenteric tension cause stasis of blood, lymph, and may cause a case of appendicitis. If the cecum was left, Dr. Still admonished the students to lift the cecum in the treatment rooms. Page 243. Dr. Still said some patients would die, and we cannot help it, he said. We would save all if we could, he says, but many come too late. Disease has got in its work, and the case is without hope. One comes in the last stages of consumption, when the whole lung is a mass of ruin and the body's dead in all its powers to sustain life. Page 245. So it's true, you may see patients where it's not curative, it's not preventative, but it may be palliative that you treat them, because at this stage that they're in, it may be so chronic, and the disease, this disease process has been occurring in the body for a long time. Vitality decreases, and its powers to sustain life have decreased. So over time, plethora of derivative systems like naprapathy, mechanotherapy, spondylotherapy, zone therapy, and other therapies developed, all borrowed wholesale from Dr. Still. Page 250. There was one copycat system that would endure. In 1898, D.D. Palmer, Daniel David Palmer, he was a magnetic healer from Davenport, Iowa. He opened a school to teach chiropractic, a method of treating disease by manual adjustment of the spine. Mr. D.D. Palmer, he professed he had stumbled upon a system by accident 3 years earlier when he restored hearing of a janitor almost deaf from 17 years. By correcting, despite the tenuous anatomical relationship, his T4. Arthur Hildreth, he recalled Palmer talking to and being treated by a number of students. So at the ASO, Palmer strenuously denied visiting Kirksville or plagiarizing Osteopathy, but in later years, several Missouri chiros who visited Dr. Still at Dr. Still's home attested to seeing the name D.D. Palmer entered in the guest book, dated sometime in the early 1890s. Dr. Still might not have minded copying him had they been true to his teachings, but heavy-handed mimics often injured patients, and by association they damaged osteopathy's reputation. Still also said that all manipulators are not osteopaths, any more than all butchers are surgeons. Page 251. I'm not going to get much into John Martin Littlejohn, but there is some details as well in the book. On page 252, it just basically mentions there that John Martin Littlejohn, 1898, was appointed to the faculty and he was teaching. And as I learned in school, John Martin Littlejohn was more about function, physiology, whereas Dr. Still was about structure and anatomy. Dr. Still disapproved of some professors that were teaching the routine use of medical instruments, believing they blunted the students' confidence in their own judgment. Dr. Still did not use a stethoscope. He did not use blood pressure machines. He detested thermometers. He instead insisted the eyes and the hands were more useful in the sick room than any artificial appliances. He also warned against over-reliance on lab tests. It may tell you how much the house is on fire, but not always tell you what started the fire and what is keeping it burning. Any physiological abnormality should serve as a preliminary step towards the real mechanical diagnosis, Dr. Still says on page 253. He told a student that I can pick the science as the greatest contribution ever made to a suffering world, if only those who practice it adhere to its eternal truths. Then the student asks Dr. Still, well, what are these truths? Dr. Still says they are found in the spinal column, with all of its intricate body framework, plus the beautiful circulation of blood and lymph through the nerve centers of the spinal cord and throughout the whole body, page 253. Now, there was a future student named Tucker, who visited Dr. Still at his house. He was just standing around his house. He wasn't going to say anything to test if Dr. Still had powers. And Dr. Still says to Tucker, in a couple of years, you will be back here studying. The idea had not entered into Tucker's head. However, Tucker did enroll into the school in the 1900s as predicted by Dr. Still, page 262. I think that's an awesome example of intuition. All communication was on a human and profoundly intimate basis, and if you lacked the ability to tolerate Dr. Still's intimacy, you barely seemed to exist to Dr. Still, and you would feel uneasy in his presence. This is how Mr. Tucker explained Dr. Still, page 263. Tucker continues about Dr. Still, saying that he was a distilled essence of kindliness and sincerity. It was a personality so selfless and so expanded that it achieved the nth degree and became impersonal. Page 263. If you remember, Dr. Still vowed to investigate the assertion that all of God's work is perfect. Only flaws Still had been able to find in men's makeup was in his power of reason. The rational mind could override the moral law and lead a person down the path of error, he says. This was the perennial struggle that Methodism strove to overcome. Men saw through the glass darkly, but at the ground of his being, the perfection of nature remained. Wrote Tucker, page 264. And then Dr. Still continues, how could a thing be and not be perfect of its class and degree? If it exists, it demonstrates its final. And this was intuitive. This is Doctor's Unconscious Philosophy, page 264. Dr. Still wrote, first there is the material body, second the spiritual being, third a being of mind which is far superior to all vital motions and material forms, whose duty is to wisely manage this great engine of life, page 264. In Dr. Still's usage of the word mind, he generally signified the unknowable aspect as the body's inherent wisdom of deity. Every single cell, an individual sentient being, constantly adapting and harmonizing its function with trillions of others, each organ and all other parts laboring together, seeming to know they are part of a stupendous whole. Page 264 to 65, and I find that fascinating. Noble aspects of the mind were experiential part informed by the senses. It was to Still simply subjective. This multifaceted faculty composed rational thought, feelings, emotions, and a host of arcane powers. It may be possible that we do not think often enough of man's dual nature. He elaborated, and that his body is under his mind and obeys its orders all the time. At the very beginning of his medical career, Dr. Still learned that mental states can profoundly affect physiology. Page 265. Interesting point. As we know today, that is commonly heard, we know that emotions and different mental states can profoundly affect the anatomy or the physiology of the body. Dr. Still would say to his students, "What you say is weighty far beyond your concept." He always told his students to find any hope of recovery and give that report to the patient. He said, "Never tell a patient he is in a bad fix, worse today than yesterday, or that he looks ill. More patients suffer and die from such imprudence and fright than the world has ever dreamed of. By contrast, adopt a positive attitude," Dr. Still says, "and educating patients about their condition often hasten recovery." He said to have patience, trust, and to gain it, to have confidence in your own ability. Confidence, commitment, and interest, or lack of it, is transmitted directly to the patient. Page 266. As we're wrapping up in this video, first step was to perfect the art of visualization, Dr. Still said to his students. He said to his students to retain in their minds a living picture of every part of the body as an artist would paint a face or a scene from their memory. Page 266. Of supreme importance was the way Dr. Still visualized from the perspective of all of the cells and its requirements for normal function. Page 268. And I find this also fascinating. When Dr. Still was investigating a particular topic, he would say he was living in the liver or being a bone. So again, putting himself into his perspective of that cell. To ascertain what was wrong with a sick baby, he would feel himself inside of it. He made himself, in rapport with the body he studied, he tried to be that bone. Page 268. So why not try that technique with your patient? If you're working on an organ, become a cell within that organ, see what that cell has to say. And in medical intuition, which I have a couple videos on, that is one of the techniques that is used in medical intuition. So from the perspective of the cell, checking what you comes to. To finish off, Still said the best were those who worked for and obtained intuitive consciousness, not those with impressive scholastic qualifications. And that's on page 269. So the next video, I'm very excited because we're going to be talking more about Dr. Still and his intuition. So it wasn't just all about reason, but he goes on and talks about intuition as well, which I think is very important. So I hope you enjoyed that video, and you guys take care. Bye-bye.